First, thank you and hello to our friends joining online, Cameron. And thank you to the organisers and stuff. And I think this has been a lovely day. That panel literally gave me life, so thank you for that. As you've heard, I'm quite opinionated and quite vocal and not that strong. But I think I care deeply about this. And what I would like to do today is to sort of show you how open science has impacted me, or how close science has impacted me in that kind of emotional, personal narrative, in the hopes that if you haven't already encountered these things, you'll be kind of primed to be aware of them. And if you have encountered them, then, solidarity. So I'm around for the rest of the evening if you want to talk about anything. Sometimes these things can be a bit contentious and stuff like that. So I'm very happy to talk offline, and also discussions after are very welcome as well, as in by email or whatever. So my name is Cass, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Data Science Institute, which means we engage with data science across the whole of the UK via a specialised centre in London. We're a research institute, not a university, so we don't teach, but we do kind of train. And there we go. And I'm going to start as the last few years have always done, and I also encourage you to do, is to put my acknowledgements first, right? This is to sort of front and center the fact that everything that I'm going to talk to you about today is stuff that I've learned and experienced through other inspirational people. So don't hide your thank yous to the end, upfront the team, and recognize that this is all a team process. So these are all folks that have been really instrumental in my journey into open science. And if you know any of them, say hi to them from me. This is also a personal journey, so that meant that I get to put in a bunch of things that I love. So these are some things that we might call shit snacks. It's like things that I have around the house that I like, and I have them in some of my presentations just to bring me a bit of joy, and also to share with you some of my little shitty things. So you'll spot these little guys and folks around the place. And so what I'd like to take you through today is the narrative of how I was working before I came to understand this thing called open science, or the replication crisis, and what changed for me once I had the vocabulary to name the processes that I was engaging in as questionable, and once I understood them as questionable research practices. And then to close with what kind of recommendations I have now based on the literature and my own personal experience as well. So we have 45 minutes to do this and questions. So I'm going to whip through some things just to kind of give you illustrative bits, but I'm happy to come back to anything if there's questions. So this is about me, so you can understand where I'm coming from. So I completed my PhD in 2014. It was neuroinformatics, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist. My background is in biology, and I came to informatics from a need to do kind of basis. I did a couple of postdocs in different institutions, and in those places, one of my favorite things to do was to write code and to help other people use kind of best practices, like teaching clinicians what a comment is in code, or teaching anybody that you can have access to reproducible tools, even if that's not the kind of pipeline that you've come up from. So I love introducing new people to things like code. And in my final postdoc, before I moved into the community management role, what happened was I had the license in my lab to do whatever I thought was appropriate as a senior postdoc. And I said, what is appropriate is open science. And they said, okay, then let's develop our open science practice as a lab. And then my first community manager position was kind of rolling out those practices and making them more available to the entire department rather than just our lab. So I literally came at this because I was doing open science, and people are like, you want to tell people? And I said, yes, I do. So I had the opportunity to tell people and share the practices. And as a community manager, my role now is to engage people in the community of whatever I'm facilitating. So there's one thing saying like, do open science, and there's another thing getting a bunch of people who are interested in it and asking them what they want to do and facilitating them doing what they want to do. So this is the thing about bringing the power back to the actual communities that you want to work with. And if your community directs it, then they're more engaged. So it's not just for love, it also has some value as well. And these are pictures of me through the years. I used to have different hair. So there are gifts as well. Sorry. So this is the story of like what I experienced. So my PhD, I had great scientific leadership, inspirational. Like it was one of those departments where people are like, oh yeah, I know that person, and they did TED Talks and cool things like that. But the actual method that we were using, they weren't so experienced in. So I was kind of floundering a little bit and doing what I could, but without having someone really close to me that understood the kind of the detail of what I was doing. So I was definitely harking. Does anyone not know what harking is? Great. And p-hacking. So hypothesizing after results are known, and p-hacking is playing with your data until you get the p-value that you want. So I was definitely engaging in those processes. I didn't call them that at the time. At the time, they were just like, oh, see, what would happen if you like use this covariate instead? And like, oh, that participant, they can probably, and it's this like, you'll see later, it's part of the process, the assumed process to get your data to a publishable state, or to get your study to a publishable state. And these next few slides are actual excerpts from my corrections from my PhD thesis, which I passed. I got a PhD. Can you read that from the back there? Yeah. So and each time I go back to this, I read it differently. So the first time I read it, when I got my corrections, I read it as, oh, they want me to edit my thesis. Fair. And now when I look at it, I see that they were really trying to help me help it not be apparent that I was doing this thing of p-hacking and harking. They were saying you need to basically remove the evidence that you are p-hacking and harking, because this is a fundamental skill in writing a neuroimaging paper. You need to be able to present a story that is believable, and it becomes less believable if you have all of these like multiple analyses that you've done. And I put everything in there because I was very honest, and like methods is important to me. But their message was, this is not how you write a neuroimaging paper. So the comment was, for example, too many seed regions were included in my analysis. So what did I do is like, I removed the number of seed regions. I didn't actually change my analysis. I just didn't tell you about all of the other ones that I did. The other one was, there's no clear hypothesis. I was like, okay, I've rewritten it to make the hypothesis more clear. I didn't change what I was doing. I didn't change the experiment. I didn't change the analysis. I just kind of filtered out, and this is where I got these. I think this is just editing. They want me just to edit it. And apparently I edited it very well. They were both very impressed with the amount of effort I put into my editing, and I got a PhD. But the thing to come back to is that I also completely want to defend, I mean, obviously you could look up where I did my PhD, you probably could look up who my reviewers were, so you can find out who these people are. But I really stand by the fact that what they were doing was just what they thought was right at the time. And I think if I had different examiners, I might have had a harder time as someone who was like hotter on these things. But they were just, they did want me to do the right thing, but the language and the vehicle that they put it through was about the paper and not the fundamental practice of doing science with integrity. I'm kind of grateful, because if they did do that, then I probably wouldn't have passed my PhD, but you know. So this is to illustrate that I absolutely wasn't alone in this, and this is something that you've encountered. If it is, you are completely not alone. So this is a paper from 2012 where they, I'm pretty sure it was in a psychology department, and they asked people to self-report on the questionable research practices that they engaged in. So you've got the self-report, what people think other people are doing, and then somehow they worked out like an actual prevalence estimate. So people are saying, I mean, I might p-hack a little bit, but everyone else is doing it like all over the place. So somewhere between those things is the truth. And what the ones that indicated are the ones that I'm pretty confident I was doing. So failing to report all the dependent measures, that first bar, failing to report all the conditions, definitely did that. We would have people in the magnet for hours, not hours, like an hour, but we didn't talk about everything all the data that we collected. Excluding data after looking at it, taking out that odd participant or that odd experiment, and claiming to have predicted an unexpected finding. Yeah, so it happens, and the point is that everyone knows it happens, and to some extent people are kind of okay with it. You know, it's become the norm, it's normalized. Now, for me, when I started to have a problem with this is when I actually encountered the impact of those kinds of practices in producing like a valid scientific report or a valid experiment. So SPM users. So SPM it's got statistical parametric mapping. It's an image analysis program for MRI. It came from UCL. It's a very widely used package. And we had one paper that I'd supported the analysis, went out for review, and the reviewer said this should have been analysed in version 12 of the program and not version 8, because version 8 is old now. So we reran the analysis with a new version, which fundamentally shouldn't have changed much, but we got completely different results. So I was like, what confidence can I have that the science that I've done is valid and robust and meaningful? And I was working in psychiatry, and these people meant a lot to me, and it cost a lot of money, and yet just changing the package, keeping on the default options, gave us a very different result. I also, one time, made a really nasty decimal point error, and my experiment was like not good. And yet, although I knew fundamentally the experiment hadn't been conducted appropriately, I still had significant findings. And again, for the imaging people, you're doing lots of multiple comparisons, so chance significance is, happens, but these were like family-wise error-corrected significance. They were robust effects, but I knew that they were invalid. So at this point, my kind of like faith in the process of science was like taking up a hit, and someone we're discussing in like 2020, and this stayed with me, the idea that these grey research practices, questionable research practices, corrode your soul. Like, I came into doing this because I cared about people, I cared about truth, I cared about helping people, and yet I knew that what I was doing was not taking us towards the truth. It was doing some other obscure thing that was distracting from the actual what we wanted to do. And then everything changed. Everything changed when, by chance, so one of the people in my acknowledgements is this guy called Etienne Roche. I hadn't seen him for years. We knew each other as DPhil students, and I ran into him at a conference, and he was like, hey, come into this open science room. And that was the point where I was like, what is open science? But actually that experience of being with other people who were invested in open science, and this was like the corner of the conference where open science was talked about, being around these people reinvigorated my belief that there are some people that are trying to do this properly, are actually trying to help people rather than just, develop their careers. I don't mean that in a malicious way, it just means that that's what the system is trying to kind of propagate. So after like being in the open science room, I wrote this blog for the journal, the community, and I explained how I viewed open science as like akin to social justice, and 5 days of being around these people was enough to help me go, okay, this is something that I want to pay attention to, and this is something that can correct the course of the path that I had seen us going on in a not entirely values-driven direction. So the QR code down there for that blog post, if you want to read it, then do, and it might strike a chord with you as well. And then talking about training, I went to an open science summer school, Oxford Berlin Open Science Summer School, and there we had, it was a whole 2 weeks long, and we had lessons in R and Git and all of the stuff, and OSF and all of the little methods. And what they wanted you to do was take one piece and try and implement that in your next project. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it all. And I had the license to do it all because that was my role in this new lab, was to develop processes to improve the efficiency of our analysis. And I saw these as improving the efficiency of our analysis. So I was incredibly lucky to be given the trust of a PI that understood the value of find something someone's passionate about and let them go with it. So we implemented all of these things for our lab, and most of them have stayed. So the buffet here, it's come up here already, like open science is like a buffet, take what you need, unless you're like a greedy pig and you want to just do it all at once, and that can work too. And then my next kind of push into it was this thing called the Turing Way, which some folks have experienced, but this is basically an online, open source, community-driven handbook on how to do all of the stuff. So it's got the practical things about like licensing and Git and all the training, but it also goes into like ethical research, collaboration, everything that's necessary to do good science is all contained in the Turing Way. And I was really lucky to participate in it early on, and now I work for them. So this is like the career part of it. Like you participate in it, and then the momentum around these things is growing. And my career would not have been the same if it wasn't for my participation in these practices. And that was my first pull request in May 2019. So what all of this kind of my experience of like changing software and like what happens if I make a decimal point error, what this kind of really brought home for me is this thing which is called the Garden of Forking Paths, or analytic flexibility. Can I just get a hands if you know about those things? Garden of Forking Paths, analytic flexibility. Great. Okay, enough for us to Google it, and enough of it. So this is the idea that on your analysis, at many points, you've got the option to choose what you do, whether you exclude a participant, whether you use this software version or the next. So I think this is actually like a poem or something. I'm not good with those things, but the idea that at various stages, you've got the chance to influence your analysis. And then where this becomes important is because this is something that we do all the time, and this is how we kind of operationalize hacking and harking. It's like we make these decisions along the way. And as good scientists, we are very skilled at doing this. We are very skilled at looking at our data, and we're very skilled at working with it and manipulating it. And unfortunately, that means that we are very good at p-hacking and harking. But as anyone who pays close attention to statistics and things will know, doing these things means your statistics can be absolutely meaningless. If you change your analysis enough times, you're bound to get a significant finding by chance. So what is the actual validity of your finding if you're doing all of these kind of flexible things? So the question is, which of the paths, how are the many ways that you can analyze anything, and this isn't just for fMRI, this is for all kind of research, there's always decisions that you can make, but which of them is actually going to bring you closer to the truth, which is going to help improve the lives of the people that we're trying to help? How are we ever going to know? So just to kind of illustrate this point, there's this happened in PNAS, and I'm going to show you a bunch of kind of slides of what happened. Basically, there was the paper was published in 2014 that demonstrated that the way people prepare to respond to hurricanes differs whether the hurricane has a female assumed name or a male assumed name. So and the finding was like people don't prepare enough for hurricanes that have like a woman's name because they underestimate the power, and like all my feminist things will go like, yeah, you're not listening because it's a woman's name. And so it was like, okay, that's a finding I think that I can get behind and believe in. And then in August, someone, Christensen came back, responded and said, but are they though? If you do your analysis in a different way, then actually they're equally prepared or equally damaging. And someone else also replied and said, the other one was like a bit more like generous. It's like, are they really? And the next reply was like, no, they are not. So you can do that in different ways. And then, of course, the authors had the right to reply, and they said, oh, no, but they really are. What happened is you all did your analysis wrong. Okay, so that happened. And then later, there was another round of responses to it. Another group of people showing that there's no evidence of a gender-based effect. And then the authors came back and said, no, there really is. If you do this and you appropriately model it, there is an effect. And then someone else, a different group, said, no, there's actually not an effect. And the authors went, no, but if you just do this, then there is an effect. So I think this is like where journals and PNS handled this well, is they published all of these and they gave the authors the right to reply. So they did allow that kind of discussion about how valid the results were. And each of these teams thought that they were doing the right thing, right? Hopefully no one's gone in there with the intention of finding an effect. They were just trying to see what was in there. But if you were reading this, like, glad I'm not a hurricane researcher, because how are you supposed to know what the actual objective truth is? But luckily, science has a way. Science has a way of helping you understand what the global effect of these kinds of things is. And one method you can use is a thing called specification curve analysis. So this, anyone familiar with this? Cool. The idea is that you identify all of the analytic decision points. So in that sort of tree diagram, you can say where all of them are. Then you run all of the possible analyses that you can, and then do some bootstrapping stats magic to show like how many ways can you analyze it to determine a positive effect or a null effect. And with this specific example, so this is how they visualized it. These are the different kind of decision points that you can make, and then they rank them in terms of the p-statistic. So anything here, these are significant findings, and then anything on that side, these are like null. So no effect, no evidence of an effect. And doing this analysis, they found that there are nearly 1,700 ways that you can analyze the data for there to be no effect, and only 37 ways that there can be an effect. So, I'm glad 1,700 different research groups didn't put that into PNS. I don't know what that means for the actual effect, but for me, this says that there's maybe a higher likelihood that the way people are interpreting this, like if you think about whether your analysis includes a covariate of like gender of the person or something like that, it's a more complex situation than one covariate having an impact on it. There's actually a number of ways it can be impacted, and maybe it's more likely that there is an effect. I think like 1,700 to 37 is a pretty good hit rate. And another thing that is kind of similar to specification curve analysis is multiverse analysis. So this is something that we see in MRI more, which is, again, perform all of your analyses, or maybe just perform a bunch of analysis that contains like a reasonable set of analysis scenarios. But as like neuroimagers and people handling large complex data sets, like there is no way that I as a researcher have the resources to run all of the possible analyses that I could do, let alone have the skills to determine which are appropriate analyses, and specification curve analysis just doesn't work with MRI because it's like a multi-vector kind of data set. But thankfully, I don't have to do the multiverse analysis because other people have done it already, and what they've demonstrated with MRI is pretty scary. So the first kind of attempt at this was 2012, where this like super genius Josh Karp, who now works at Center for Open Science, he did the thing of analyzing one data set in many different ways. And he's the only author on here which I think says that someone said someone didn't want him to do it. And like, you don't just do this by yourself unless no one else wants to be on the paper. But he only, he used one package, and he used a narrow set of kind of decision points. So not even a massive kind of, like a full multiverse. And he found nearly 7,000 different ways that he could analyze this MRI data set. And these maps, so on the left, this is the mean activation across all 17,000 analyses. And on the right is the areas that had the most like range of the final score. So to give you like positioning, these are slices of the brain. I don't even know what experiment was doing. I don't think it matters. But the idea is that here, these are the blobs that you'll see reported in studies as saying we have a very like important, strong result here. But these are also the places where it's very dependent how you've analysed it, whether you get a significant result or not. So that was worrying. But that kind of flew under the radar for a long time. And I remember I had this in my like Mendeley I was using, and I was like, this is curious, but like no one's talking about it, so we'll let it go. And then in 2019, Alex Bowering and Camille Marmot and Tom Nichols, they did a similar kind of thing where they took the default pipelines for the three main MRI analysis programs, SPM, FSL, and AFNI, and they said, how does the analysis of the same participant perform under the defaults of these different packages? And it turns out it's very different depending on what package you're using, and that is worrying. They presented this at a conference, and I'm sitting next to my mates, and they're like, it's my SPM mate, my AFNI guy, my FSL, and we're all sitting there going, shit. Like, I just used SPM because that's what my lab used, and other people just use FSL because they're in Oxford, and other people use AFNI because they have reasons. But each column here is a different participant, and then each row is that analysed with the different package. And there's some like commonality, right? This participant in the middle. These are open data sets, there's consistency, but there's also areas of fluctuation. And I don't know what happened to the final participant with FSL, but like that's a whole participant dropped. That's good. So yeah, so imagine that your favorite analytic pipeline is shown to just be context specific, like the context of me as a researcher who grew up with SPM now is completely thrown into potential confusion because someone else could have done exactly the same analysis and come out with a completely different result. And then the final like fun one, that these folks did a many analysts approach where they took a data set and they asked like anyone who wanted to can analyze this data set in any way you want to, and then let's see which hypotheses we agree on. So rather than actual blobs, they set specific hypotheses for the experiment, and they wanted to see how many people had a null effect and how many people verified the hypothesis. So same data set analyzed by 70 teams, and they were asked to really carefully document the analysis that they did in order to kind of infer backwards. And these numbers are numbers, but the key take home here is that like one result, one hypothesis, not a single hypothesis, was what do you do with hypotheses? Validated by every team. So even a very key simple hypothesis was not validated by every team, and some hypotheses were like very low acceptance, but then the confidence, everyone was very confident in their pipeline and in their interpretation. So I think that's something with the ELO paper, there's something about our confidence in what we're doing and how that biases how we interpret our results, and the relation between our confidence and the actual observable consistency is sometimes not accurate. So as an imaging researcher, it's like, but luckily all of these papers have recommendations for what we can do to help get ourselves out of it. And all these recommendations fall into the same sort of theme. And that theme is describe your analysis. Like if two different people analyze the same data set and they come up with two different findings, if we don't know what differences they make, how can we infer the impact of their pathways and their pipelines on the data. If everyone is reporting it fantastically, then we can look like systematically and see what changes impact things. So CARP 2012, like thoroughly describe your analysis and your methods. From the Bowring paper, share your analysis script. So this is a stage further than just describing it in a kind of prose way. Share your analytic script, and one more. And from the many analyst paper, not only share your scripts, but also do it in a way that is computationally reproducible. So Docker and the other thing that you do with art, and prepare for your data to be analyzed by other people. So share your data, share your code, and allow other people to verify your findings or do something differently and see why it's different. So these are kind of what I took out of these recommendations. First is to pre-register, with the caveat that this is really, really, really hard, especially in neuroimaging. Many people do not want to do it. Many people want to hold on to their analytic flexibility because that's where they get the p-value, which can make the paper. So it's super tough, and it's less established in some disciplines than others. Some places they love it. Apparently in like animal research, like pre-registration is not well received. So it's fine to explore your data and look at this analytic path flexibility thing, but make sure you report it like that rather than presenting it as fact, as I did once when I edited my thesis. Think about this computational reproducibility bit. How can you assess the impact of someone's analysis if you can't reproduce it? It's just like, where do we go from there? And I had a few conversations with people that had done like meta-analyses and things in their research, and like once you see how hard it is to try and reproduce someone else's research, you appreciate the effort of someone going to create a tool that you can transfer. Share your data where you can. Think about data management, which is like from the beginning, how are you going to make sure that the data can be shared appropriately? And also think about working in big teams, consortiums, and ideally those consortiums should have people like me as a research infrastructure role. Like my job is to help you do the science in a kind of slightly different way to like HR or contracts. They kind of still want to help you do the science, but I really want to help you. So the place that kind of gave me a bit of peace after losing all faith in MRI and like by inference all science, because we cannot approach a ground truth when there are so many truths, I think it's fine that we can't use one method to understand like a complex system, which anything is complex, right? We do people, like psychology is ridiculously complex. How can we assume to understand everything by just doing one experiment with one method? So we need to be thinking about ways of incorporating other methods and generalizing and triangulating. The lone genius, like one person up in a lab doing everything by themselves, that just isn't going to cut it anymore. And we need to think about working with infrastructure professionals like RSE, so research software engineers are incredibly valuable, statisticians, community managers, and at Turing we have this thing called RAMs as well, research application managers, who can help you develop your outputs, your research objects into something that can be transferred into industry or elsewhere. And then if you don't know how to do all of these things, that is absolutely fine, because this thing called the Turing Way exists, and there are other resources as well, but I work for the Turing Way, so and I've got stickers. You can read the Turing Way to understand how to do these things, but in order to really kind of get into it, you need to experience it, and it's called the Turing Way. It's like, that's you going through this journey, and you need to go along this journey. You don't need to, but if you do, you'll have a different level of appreciation for all of the background stuff that's necessary as well. And that's not only the process of, you contribute to your Turing Way on GitHub and via pull requests so you can learn those skills, but actually what's it like to participate in a team where ethical collaboration is like the most important thing. like it doesn't matter if we don't produce something, as long as we contribute ethically and understand and respect each other and value diversity. Because as a skill and as experience, you don't get that in many places. But if you come, here is a place that you can come and experience that and then share that with your teams as well. So here's the Turing Way. It's an online handbook. The QR code will take you to the website. It looks just like a book, so you can search for things, you can like look up specific like questions that you have like around licensing, you can search in the toolbars and things like that. And it has so much information on everything because anyone can contribute to it if they go through this like reviewed contribution pathway. And then the where the contributions are acknowledged is if you go to the GitHub repository, you can see all the version control about what goes into it. You can see the processes that are in place to ensure the contributions are ethical and collaborative. And down at the bottom, there's the all contributors bit. So anyone that contributes anything, doesn't have to be code or written, they are acknowledged in that. So this is something that then you become part of the Turing Way research community, and that can go on your CV. Your contributions in here are a citable output very quickly, and it's something that you can build on. So the aim of the community is to grow people up this kind of pyramid of contribution. It's a bit of a pyramid scheme, but if you want to, there are ways for you to contribute further and develop your interests and grow yourself in a direction that is that you want to. So here's my final slide, and okay for timing. The take-home messages are always have beer money. But remember that this bad practice is something that you will see all over the place, and it brings me great joy to talk to people, talk to a room, and like 5 years ago I'd say something about open science and it's like, no. But now, I mean, we're at a conference about this, so selective, but it's becoming more widely known and appreciated and understood, but that doesn't mean that the bad stuff isn't going to be there. Now you can be aware of it, do what you can to defend yourself from it, and do that in a way that you feel safe and comfortable with. But you can always retreat to a community. So we go out into the world and see all this crap, and then I come back to my Turing Way and we bitch about it, and it's good. It kind of fills up your cup. The best research and the best communities to engage with are diverse. This is kind of like a moral stance, like everyone should be able to participate in this process of science, but there's also instrumental value as well. A more diverse team produces more robust outputs. So it's in your interest and it's in the world's interest to be diverse. And I really hope that you will be able to connect with your local open science community, reproducibility, and Turing Way and many others as well. So think about what your next step is and talk to people about that and think like, what's something that I can achieve in my work and where do I ultimately want to go? And that's that.